Okay, everyone, we'll go ahead and kick things off today. Again, thank you so much for making space. Thank you for investing a little bit of your time today to come listen to two very, very important voices in our field. Before we do get started, a couple of pieces of housekeeping. First of all, welcome to the December 2024 edition of TrustMasters Monthly. Thank you. Secondly, Q&A. We will be actively monitoring Q&A throughout our session. But to be totally transparent, I think based on dialogue, we might not necessarily have time to hit all of your questions. That doesn't mean we won't follow up. But we do make the commitment, I make the commitment to you that any questions we're unable to address on the session today, we will absolutely follow up with you after the fact to at least give some sort of direction if we can't fully answer the question. So thank you for that. Now, I think the best way to frame up today is an anecdote from my past. In the late 90s, I had an opportunity to see a professor at the time named Vince Cerf give a talk on TCP/IP. Now, those of you that know that Vince Cerf is one of the co-developers of TCP/IP. He's since become known as the father of the internet. So at the time, I had no idea. I just thought it was this really interesting, down-to-earth person who was delivering a lot of knowledge. Now, I wish someone had had the wherewithal to explain to me just how important Vince Cerf was before I attended that lecture, but they didn't. So, in my mind, the best thing that I can do for our participants today is be sure that you understand who our presenters are today so that you understand the full context of the message that they're bringing. First, we have Kim Lucy. If Vince Cerf was the father of the internet, Kim Lucy is the mother of modern management systems. Now, Kim, I know that it kills you to hear me say it, but it's very, very true. Kim is one of the subject matter experts that all other SMEs go to for answers on how to think about management systems and how to implement management systems, up to and including ISO 42001. Kim, thank you for being here.
Thank you.
Second, yes. If Kim is the mother of modern management systems, we also have Shay Brown, who is in reality the father of algorithm audit. Now, we've seen many, many things changing in our field over the past few years, one of which is an understanding that we don't necessarily know what we don't know about how to pragmatically and in a structured way approach auditing the algorithms that are making up a lot of the machine learning feedback that we're getting from modern AI systems. Shay and his team at Babel have developed a protocol that is quickly becoming the standard for algorithm audit. And to that end, Shay, thank you so much for making space to come speak with us today.
Thank you very much. My pleasure.
Of course, of course. Okay, now, most of our participants, most of our viewers are here because today we intend to talk a little bit about a new standard from ISO 42001. I think in order to really do any conversation around 42001 justice, however, we really need to have a basic understanding of what management systems are. To that end, and Kim, I'm sorry to give you such a generic question, but could you maybe take just a moment to explain to our listeners, to our viewers, what a management system really is, what its intent is, and the value an organization can hope to derive from implementing a management system?
Yep, sure. So probably a lot of people who are on the call with us are familiar in some respect with management systems. And from an ISO perspective, management systems are a type of standard that are all based on something called the high-level structure that is designed in the ISO directives. This high-level structure provides a common framework for any type of management system that is designed with a set of management clauses that provide organizations kind of a systematic, programmatic way to do things such as establishing the context of your organization, doing risk management, and doing kind of continuous improvement throughout your organization. Now, no matter what type of management system you are designing or implementing, they all have to have these same high level structure requirements in them. That's true for something like 27001, which is about cybersecurity, 27701, which is about privacy, 42001, which is about AI, which I kind of group together as these technology management systems, or for something that is completely different, such as environmental management systems, 9001, which is more about manufacturing type quality management systems. There are management systems for food safety. There are management systems for literally anything that you can think of. All of them are based on this high level structure, though, that ISO puts out. And so the real benefit of this is that organizations who implement management systems, no matter what type of management system, no matter what type of industry they're in, no matter where they're at in the world, are getting the benefits of having this common framework in place. So regardless of whether you are, say, a medical device manufacturer, if you are implementing 42001, you're still working off this common baseline framework that is familiar to your organization, that you've already established these baseline management processes, especially if you are in or any kind of relations to the tech sector where you've established 27001, 27701, 42001 is going to look especially familiar, is going to be much easier for your organization to operationalize, and going to be much more scalable for your organization as you implement and adopt it.
And Kim, a couple things as a follow-up to that. You mentioned the high-level structure, which kind of feels like a common denominator.
Yep, exactly.
Is the benefit for integrating management systems knowing that there is a common high-level structure between them?
Yep. And so, when you say integrating, there's kind of two aspects of that. One is, as you adopt the management system into your organization, implement it. So if your organization is already doing those kind of core things from a management perspective, this is different than the kind of system level controls that you need to operationalize for AI systems or for cybersecurity, but the core management system principles are the same. The other aspect of integration is that when you actually do audits and get certified for management systems, you can have integrated audits done, which means that if you choose to, you can select to have an audit done in an integrated fashion such that the auditor comes out and does the certification across the different management systems that you have implemented rather than as separate certifications. So that gives you some efficiencies as you're doing your certifications if you choose to do an integrated audit.
Okay. And then as I do think about this, really in my mind, it almost feels like a no-brainer in so many ways. But at the same time, as I speak with our customers, there's lots of hesitation, and not necessarily consternation, but hesitation, chiefly because of the unknown about the focus of 42001 and how to actually even begin the process of implementing a new management system. And Shay, with your customers, I think to some extent you're helping guide them through that process of identifying what they need and then slowly building out a structure of an AIMS, an AI management system. As you do talk to your market, are there common points of pushback or common misconceptions maybe that our listeners need to be aware of so that they can address those concerns for themselves?
Yeah, there are definitely common themes that I see, and it centers a little bit on if you focus on what is the point of these systems, right? And in particular, an AI management system, like what are we getting at? Why are we talking about this now? And we weren't talking about this before. One is that AI is around now. That's an obvious one. But the key thing is that AI is exposing companies to risk. There's operational risk, there's liability, there's reputational, there's regulatory risk. There's all sorts of risks that are happening. And so what I see in the way I sort of advise clients is to start from the bottom up, right? We know that there's this common structure, and when you implement these systems, you're going to want to go from high level and go down. But when you're talking about where do I need to implement it, and it's the scope that's really the confusing part. Which processes, which systems, where, and that's a tough problem. And to solve that problem, you have to understand where are the risks. And that is going to inform where you want to scope out this management system. Because if you ignore, or if you try to do it from the top down without recognizing that there are some places where there's more risk than others, then you're going to miss out on the full effectiveness of that. And so that takes sort of this initial groundwork of sort of doing a triaging process of where's the low-hanging fruit in terms of risk, where are the places where there are edge cases, who do I need to talk to if I don't understand how to do that, and there's a structured process to that. It's just not clear to everybody exactly how you approach that. That seems to be the biggest problem at the moment.
And then, Kim, I noticed you react visibly when she mentioned scoping. It feels like maybe this is a very important concept for our listeners.
Yeah, I mean, I think that so scoping is a key concept of all management systems. It's one of the requirements in the high level structure in all management systems, that you have to define your scope, and it's one of the biggest things that I see organizations struggle with, is, well, how do I define my scope? It's particularly challenging, I think, with something like AI, where it's very new and we're kind of struggling with, well, what does that mean in the sense of you have lots of organizations that are using AI or components of AI in many different areas of the organization. And so, like Shay said, it's thinking about where are the greater risks. You also need to think about, the very first requirement in any management system is thinking about the context of your organization. And if the context of your organization is such that you are subject to certain regulatory requirements like the AI Act, you may have to scope in certain AI applications that, to you may not necessarily be high risk, but to the EU, they might consider it high risk. Or as new regulations come out in different parts of the world, they might consider it high risk. So the context of the organization requirement and the scoping requirement really work hand in hand. And that's something that, as you are implementing a management system and thinking about implementing a management system, I would say starting with those two requirements and really thinking about how they work together are the key things that you need to start with and really think about in terms of how do I build my management system? How do I think about starting to implement? What is the context of my organization, including who are my customers, who are my other stakeholders, what regulatory requirements am I subject to, and how does that affect my scope? And how does my risk profile as an organization affect my scope? All of those things are going to help you determine what systems are in scope for you, what AI components are in scope for you, because it doesn't mean anything and everything has to be in the scope of your 42001 management system and certification, but you need to sit down and very methodically go through those expectations and that context and those risks to determine what your scope is.
And Kim, you said something very important just a few moments ago, which largely dealing with scoping and context. You had mentioned external stakeholders and external regulation. I think another common misconception that I run into that might be good for our viewers to hear about today is the extensibility of the management system itself. Again, I think a common misconception is that the frameworks, the management system frameworks, are so prescriptive, it leaves no room to add additional concerns, additional controls. And largely that's not the case. But I don't know if you'd be open to maybe elaborating just a little bit on how one might extend their scope and extend really the depth and breadth of controls brought to bear to meet external requirements.
Yeah, I mean, both the scope as well as the controls, and again, because the entire concept of management systems is this idea of continual improvement. And so you should constantly be evaluating your entire management system, whether it's working for you, whether the scope is appropriate. You can expand your scope. So you get audited one year and your scope is one thing. The next year, it may be something different, bigger or smaller, and the auditor takes that into account. And that is known and expected. I used to, here at Microsoft, I used to be responsible for our 27001 certification for our global data centers. And every year we had additional data centers added to our scope because, we were building or leasing or adding more data centers to that scope. And so our scope changed every single year, and that's expected. And a well operating management system, the scope should be changing. It shouldn't necessarily be static every year. As far as the control set, I would say the same thing. An organization that isn't just doing a checkbox management system, who is actually implementing it the correct way, thinking about it, really evaluating their risks, they should be adding in controls or taking those baseline controls that are in something like 42001 and modifying their internal controls such that, so for example, one thing that we do internally and that my team does a lot of internally is mapping between the 42001 controls and the EU AI Act requirements. And so we can see, obviously, the 42001 controls, because they're international, they're meant to be, more abstract and high level. They're not going to be as granular as the requirements in the AI Act. So we want to see, if you have this abstract control, what are the more specific requirements in something like the AI Act? Where do we need to modify our internal, engineering controls to meet that specificity of something like the AI Act, then write our internal controls such that it meets both of them. And so you need to do that work so that you can meet, of course, you can meet your 42001 certification. But again, understanding the context of your organization, obviously you have regulatory requirements, and so you need to pull that specificity in as well.
And so really, the management system is just the base from which we can extend, we can mold to meet whatever external obligation we might take on. Now, Kim, one of the things that you mentioned was the EU AI Act. And to my knowledge, we don't necessarily have a solid conformance standard to measure ourselves against yet today. But I do know that 42001 as a base seems to be a really, really good place to start in building some sort of proactive control, some proactive mechanism to govern the AI life cycle. Shay, I don't know if you have any opinion, anything that you'd like to share as it relates to 42001 in context of not just the EU AI Act, but any other external regulation that you're dealing with today.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is a common worry that companies are having right now because they see the regulations like the EU Act looming and they want to do something about it. And the question is, what do you invest in? How do you start? Because the standards for those are not finished. The harmonized standards for those are not finished. And so ISO 42001 is a natural choice. And I think there's still hesitation because the question, you might say to yourself, I'm going to invest in doing this. And then it turns around and the EU decides that it's something different or it's not enough. And I'm going to have to duplicate work, right? Which is a worry. But I think the point here is that no matter what Sensenlac comes up with, there's no way in which 42001 is going to be incompatible with that. Because to Kim's point, you're going to be trying to tailor it with the expectation that there are these other external obligations. And so you choose controls that are going to align with what you see as the future regulatory expectations. And if it turns out in 2026, they are slightly different and the language is slightly different, that's part of the continual improvement of the management system. It's not a duplication of all that effort. And there's nothing in the EU AI Act in terms of the structure, like the skeleton, the infrastructure of what you need to build, that is incompatible with an AI management system as ISO 42001 has articulated. There have been comments about things, the risk assessment or the focus is slightly different, but that's not a sufficient argument in my mind, because you choose how you assess risk. The management system is just asking you to make choices and to document them in certain ways and connect them with your controls. The way you do that, if you want to focus on fundamental rights, which is what the EU AI Act Article 9 is going to require of you, absolutely do that, right? There's nothing that is, and in fact, you can look at 42005 and get some great advice on exactly how you might implement that. And so in my mind, there's no incompatibility. And there's the worry about duplicated efforts is unfounded, because it's the structure that you will put all of the other obligations on. And that foundation, you definitely build a good foundation before you build the house. And this is the foundation. And in my mind, there's not really a conflict.
Well, and Shay, another point of pushback that I commonly get is organizations don't necessarily want to feel as if they remove options from their ability to grow and innovate the way they choose to. One of the things both of you have mentioned repeatedly is risk. And it does feel like with frameworks, with standards, there's potential in mitigating risk to also hamper, to also put speed bumps in front of what could potentially be innovation for organizations. Is that a fair sentiment, or does it need to be looked at through a different lens? Can innovation be impaired, or can it be enhanced through use of a governance framework like 42001?
I don't know who you want to tackle that first.
Either, both.
I mean, like, there's no way that you could argue that it's not a lift to build a management system, right? So I won't argue that you don't have to do things. But I think the idea is to move slow so that you can move fast. And if you think about what causes operational drag and what causes a lack of adoption, what causes your sales cycle to slow down, all of those things you can point to the management system as mitigating those. And so if you want to innovate and if you want to go to market quickly with something, with a new feature, or if you want to integrate into your company a new tool which you want to socialize and get everybody to use, having that management system in place is going to allow you to do that faster. And so you have to put up with the fact that, yes, you have to do work now, which is going to be a drag operationally, but the goal is that you will be able to do everything faster, not just innovate, but also change management within your organization for anything that's related to technology. And that's what everybody's trying to do. And so to me, it makes sense, but it is something you have to just be aware that they're going to move slow to move fast later.
Yep. Yeah, and I would definitely agree with that. I think one of the biggest benefits of management systems is their adaptability and flexibility. And yes, there is an upfront cost in terms of both financial cost and time and people. But, again, if you implement them correctly and actually put the effort in and make the commitment to do them properly and don't just make it a checkbox exercise, you can utilize them in a way that the controls and processes are really adaptable to not just, right now we have the EU AI Act, but we're going to see regulations come up across the world. We're going to see regulations come out of, Asia and Australia and the, different states in the US likely rather than at a federal level. And you're going to be able to use that foundation that you've built. What we always kind of talk about internally is that no, you're not going to be able to necessarily take that certification and hand it off to the regulators, but the evidence that you generate by doing this management system, by doing the controls, is the same evidence that you will need to comply with your regulatory requirements. And so it's you're doing the same things that you need to do. Sure, ideally, they'll accept a certification. But even if that's not the case, your customers are likely going to require this, your suppliers are likely going to require this, and you're going to be generating the evidence that is the same evidence that regulators are going to require.
And Kim, I think what you just referenced there, the ability to reuse documentation and work papers from building your aims or running your management system to supply to those that need it, even if they won't accept your certification. In my mind, that's a prime example of slowing down to go fast. Through operationalizing your management system, you put yourself in a position to be successful if and when the time comes to produce evidence for someone else, but which I think is absolutely incredible. And that someone else, regardless of what's happening with regulation in the EU, in the States, we're starting to see a trend wherein suppliers are needing to provide more and more assurance reporting to those in their value stream. As an example, Microsoft, the SSPA program for 2025 now recommends or allows an alternate validation mechanism for AI systems of ISO 42001 certification. Do you see that as becoming more of a trend in the States in lieu of federal regulation that is more market pressure as opposed to direct regulatory pressure?
Yeah, I mean, management systems, particularly in the tech sector, and particularly in the what I like to call digital services or non-tangible products kind of sector, have traditionally been driven by the market, because up until the last 5 years or so, we haven't been heavily regulated. GDPR was really the first big regulatory push we saw, and up until then, it was really only market driven in terms of supplier and customer expectations. And 27001 was the first real certification to come out for cybersecurity that became kind of the preeminent way to show, like, look, we're doing security and customers want to see this certification and suppliers want to see this certification. I suspect we will see that trend continue in the US with 42001. We saw it with 27701 with privacy. We've seen in certain US states, Colorado has an AI law where they actually particularly name 42001 as one of the ways that you can show compliance. I think different states will have certain things, but in the US, particularly with, the new administration and not knowing what's going to happen with the current executive order around AI, I suspect it will likely remain more market driven. That's just my own personal opinion.
And so you seem to acknowledge, do you share a similar opinion, or do you have different thoughts on this?
No, I agree. I mean, from experience, running an audit AI audit and assurance firm, I mean, most of the time when people come to us, it's because of market pressure. They're trying to sell into enterprise. And this is, I mean, for the global audience listening, those trying to sell into European or North American markets, there's going to be pressure. If you have an AI system and you want it, and you want to get into enterprise, they're going to push back. They're going to want to see something. And to the extent that there's a standard out there, 42001 is the standard. It doesn't always have to be that way, and there's often nuances in terms of risk that the enterprise recognize, because more and more enterprises have AI governance boards where they're going to weigh in on these procurement questions and will have specific worries. But I have a feeling that market pressure is going to make a standard like 42001 table stakes for SaaS companies that have AI components to actually get those enterprise accounts.
Which, and on that note, Shay, one of the, I won't say it's misconceptions, but misconceptions that I deal with when I speak with people is that there is an understanding, right or wrong, that 42001 is essentially a security certification for AI systems. And that's not the case at all. 42001, and you're both shaking your head no. Before I say too much, Kim, Shay, maybe educate our audience just a little bit on the real intent of ISO 42001 as an AI lifecycle governance, AI lifecycle management system. Kim, maybe we start with you.
Yeah, I mean, so, if you read the very first part of the document, is the scope of the standard, which is to enable organizations to implement responsible AI for the use and development and implementation of AI systems. It's about responsible AI. So what responsible AI means is really up to the organization to define for themselves. And that's, one of the key requirements is you need to define your responsible AI objectives. What does that mean for you as an organization? That doesn't mean you get to say like, oh, responsible AI for us means like creating drones to like bomb people. It means, again, that you have to go back to this question of the context of your organization. What are the expectations of our customers, of society, of the area that we operate in, the regulatory requirements that we're subject to. So it's not a free pass that you get to say, I get to create my own rules for responsible AI. But it's an acknowledgement that, for example, a company that operates in China may have a different context around what responsible AI means than a company that operates in the United States or a company that operates in the EU. So it's really about AI systems. It's about creating, using, implementing AI systems responsibly. Security is part of that. Privacy is part of that. Sourcing data responsibly is a part of that. The AI system lifecycle is a part of that. Sourcing suppliers responsibly is part of that. Doing impact assessments and thinking about the impact of your systems on societies and individuals is a part of that. So, it has all of these components, but it is in no way primarily about security at all.
In fact, in my mind, one of the bigger focuses of 42001 is in bias identification and mitigation. And Shay, I think you and your team at Babel do a number of bias audits, not specifically for 42001, but I do think you have a unique perspective on what it takes to identify and then mitigate bias in production. I'm not sure if you'd care to share.
Yeah, I mean, I think to connect up with it's not just about security, I think, or privacy. It's AI and the AI management system is, I think we all realize that AI impacts many fundamental rights. There's many harms that could happen to there's value destruction that can happen with AI. And the management system is meant to manage those risks. And so wherever those risks live, the management system is meant to address them and mitigate them. And so so the reason we're talking about AI and the risks of AI kind of started from the bias thing, where we recognize that AI systems being used in predictive policing or recidivism or facial recognition had biases built in. We're still seeing it. It's an unsolved problem. And it comes from the way machine learning encodes patterns and data. And machine learning is the basis for AI now. That's sort of synonymous when you talk about those. And so, well, there's almost no way to get around the fact that when you scan your company in the use of AI and think about risks, bias is going to show up as one of those. Almost by default. You should probably just have it on the list and don't erase it because it's going to be there. And so because of that, you will almost always have to answer the question, what is your company doing about the potential for AI systems to be biased in various contexts? However your system is using AI or developing it, and it starts through the whole life cycle of the development. There are different inputs and places where it can inject. So it's almost inseparable from it. It's just one of many risks, but I think to your question, it is something that every company is going to have to think about when they set up that management system. Is that's by default a risk, and so let's just make sure we're trying to assess it, remediate it, and that we've got that documented. And we do that kind of work. That's something that we started with. Babel actually stands for Brown Algorithmic Bias Lab, and it's because that is one of the more difficult technical challenges. And the management system is there to support that kind of activity within the organization, whether it's getting somebody external to help you or just having an internal team to evaluate those risks. But there's kind of no getting around it at this point.
And guys, as crazy as this is to say, we're on our 6-minute warning. So I do want to cover a couple of more topics. And Shay, really to dovetail on a concern that you just brought up, and it's getting started. As organizations are recognizing that they do have an obligation, that something does need to be done, that some sort of intent, some sort of structure needs to be applied to their operations so that they can develop AI responsibly. As we think about 42001 and as we think about building an AIMS, where on earth do we start? I mean, it really does feel overwhelming. Are there a series of steps that organizations can pursue? I mean, I have my own ideas here, but I would love to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, I'll go quickly. And I think to me, like there's probably many ways to approach it. It depends on your organization. So one easy way is if I already have 27,001, let's say, implemented, I will need to look at the risks and figure out what kind of bolt-ons do I need to have compared to 42,001. So that's one way. I would say for those who don't know how to start at all and they haven't had a management system like that, for me, it has to start with the context of your organization, which is kind of why the standard's laid out that way, and the assessment of risk. And so it's a tough conversation. It's getting people in a room together and looking at your organization and saying, who are we impacting? Who cares about this? Where do we work? How do we do that work? And just getting a list of the stakeholders and what they care about and what are the potential ways in which the way your company uses AI could impact them. And then you have to prioritize, right? There's limited resources. And from that prioritization, based on risk, and get some external help if you need it, or if general counsel, whoever, get this multi-stakeholders in the room. And then based on that prioritization, then you start drawing out the scope. What can we do reasonably in the next 3 months? And then draw that scope. And then you start looking through the rest of what happens. And I think the next step is looking at your risk management system. In my view, that's the hub and spoke in terms of how you're actually communicating and talking about risk within your organization. I'll leave it at that.
And then Shay, Kim, before we move on to you to get your opinion, Shay, just to clarify, Babel can assist organizations in getting ready. So everything you just described is something you can assist organizations in doing. Is that fair?
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. I think that, yep.
And then Kim, to you, I mean, I'm novice at this. Where do I begin?
Yeah, I mean, I would have to agree with Shay. There are different entry points depending on your organization, whether you already have a management system implemented. It can be easier because you can take what you already have in terms of the management clauses and kind of do a gap analysis between what you have for security versus what you need for 42001. If you're starting from scratch, you know, what Shay said, kind of getting in a room with other leaders in your organization to really go through that activity of determining what your context is and who your stakeholders are, who you have obligations to, both legal and otherwise, other expectations that may not be legal necessarily, but you still have those expectations to fulfill. You know, it can be helpful to kind of sit in with other organizations who have management systems implemented and see how they do it, kind of observe in real time. I know we've had people in not necessarily other organizations, but other parts of Microsoft, because oftentimes we operate as many different organizations, even though we're one company. So different parts of the company sit in, you know, when I was still doing the 27001 implementation, we had different parts of the company who hadn't implemented a management system yet come in and sit with our org as like we went through an audit to kind of learn, like, how do we do this? What are considerations? Like, what are the questions the auditor is asking you? That's a really good way to learn what people do. Hiring consultants to help isn't always the most popular answer, but if you can find a good one who is not, you know, who's not just out to kind of get a bunch of money, who actually knows what they're doing and can help lead you through that process and do a pre-assessment, it can really be worth the money. So yeah, it really is just context dependent on your organization.
Thank you, Kim. And
Yeah.
for our listeners, one thing I do want to say before we move on, I think we'll have time for one question, if I can say this succinctly. 42001, the time to start is now. Yes, you do need budget. There is a cost associated with it. Yes, you do need time. This is absolutely an investment in operationalizing new practices for your organization. But yes, it will be worthwhile. Really, the best thing that you can do to protect your organization against the coming changes is to start today. Don't wait. There really is no need. Really quickly, one question. It looks like from Kevin Shawinski. How should companies think about the delays of harmonized standards, something that we talked about earlier, coming from the EU? And even in light of that, just to reiterate, does it seem like 42001 is a good place to start today to begin really taking control of organizations' destiny, allowing organizations to retain control of their own destiny, that is? So how do we feel about the delay? Is that going to be problematic? And secondly, is 42001 really the best path forward with what we know today? And that's for Kim, Shay, either of you.
Yeah, go ahead, Kim.
I mean, I can't, again, that's organization dependent. What I can say again, and this is coming from experience with 27701 and GDPR, where we went through kind of the same, slightly different context because they didn't have the same framework where they did standardization requests and harmonized European norms, and it wasn't exactly the same process, but you know, there was a push to try and get the EC to accept 27701 as proof of compliance, and it's what, 4 years later, and that still hasn't happened. we're still using that internally, and many other organizations are still using 27701 as kind of a preeminent way to show that they're doing privacy right, to generate the evidence they need to demonstrate to their customers, and also to have that evidence ready should they get a regulatory request for privacy. So as a case study, I think that that is a good one. I can't say what is the right answer. I can say that based on my experience as a implementing a good baseline for an organization, especially in light of not having a lot of things available right now, that management systems are a really good way to go, because again, they are flexible and scalable and adaptable, and they can be molded to what you need in the future. So that's kind of my short answer to that question with the time that we have left.
No, thank you, Kim. Shay, I don't know if you have an opinion to offer.
I mean, I do. I think it's yeah, you can't wait. It's going to be a big lift, right? If you wait for the harmonized standards, you're not going to have momentum towards something that is going to be scalable and sustainable. So you got to start somewhere. And if you look at the letter of the law in the EU AI Act, and you look at ISO 42001, like I said before, there's no incompatibilities. So sure, what you exactly have to measure at some point, you may have to change. What you call a document or the way in which you format something might have to change. You might have to add a few things, but it's not going to be a fundamental substantive shift in directionality. And so knowing that momentum it's going to take a while, and knowing the momentum is going to matter, there's no sense in waiting. And so the structure of 42001 is directionally, and probably the Venn diagram is a pretty good overlap. There's no worry in my mind. There's plenty of angst. Everybody has angst about the fact that it's going to be, might get surprises when this harmonized standards come out. But I have a feeling that those surprises will be small. They will be sort of contained in certain areas. And we already know what those areas are roughly. And so just plan in those areas to put a little extra effort. I think it's pretty straightforward. I mean, doing it is not straightforward, but conceptually it's straightforward.
Where partnerships with readiness organizations like Babel become so critically important. Kim, Shay, thank you so much for making the time today. To our viewers, thank you. We've kept it over just a little bit. Again, we'll follow up with the Q&A questions that we weren't able to address. Should you have any questions, do not hesitate to reach back out. Kim, Shay, I think your contact information will be associated with this webinar. Yeah, thank you. Yeah. Everyone have a great day. Get started today. Again, this is budgeting season for most people. If it's already done, try to open it back up. This is something that really needs to be on your agenda. Okay, I'm being bad with goodbyes. I hope everyone has a great day. Thank you all so much.
Thank you, everyone. Happy holidays.